First 2 weeks went by without any major incidents. Guillermo was kind. His behavior didn't give me any reason to distrust him. And although the house still felt strange at times, I tried to ignore it. However, everything changed one night. I was woken up by a strong smell of something burning. It was intense, as if something was being consumed inside the house. I immediately sat up, my heart racing, got up and opened the door cautiously, expecting to see smoke or flames, but I only saw shadows. In a hurry, I grabbed Estrella and checked the kitchen. Everything was in order. There was no fire, no burning embers, and no sign that anything had been burned. Yet the smell lingered, filling the air, as if something invisible was slowly burning away. Gradually, I began to notice other things. When I carried Estrella on my back with the rebozo, I felt her moving in a strange way, different from the simple natural adjustment of a baby. It was as if something was making her twist slowly and deliberately. She didn't cry, didn't complain, but her body seemed to have movements that weren't hers. More than once, I got alarmed and immediately removed the rebozo, my heart tightening with fear. Every time I did, I would find her completely calm, looking at me with her big innocent eyes, not understanding what was happening. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, that I was imagining things from the accumulated stress. One day while cleaning the room, I felt something different. Estrella was on my back, but suddenly an icy pressure ran down my spine. It was a firm, heavy contact, as if an adult hand had been placed directly on me, right where my daughter was. I froze instantly. The sensation was so real. I quickly took off the rebozo, terrified by what I could see, but Estrella remained just as usual. There was no one else with us. Although I tried to focus on my chores and take care of my daughter, I couldn't ignore the growing feeling of discomfort. When Guillermo went out to the field to check on his workers, the house would fall completely silent. I would take advantage of those moments to relax my arms a bit and let Estrella rest in the hammock in the living room. The first time I noticed something strange, I thought it was just my imagination. The hammock began to move. With a slow, barely perceptible sway, as if the air was gently pushing it. I stood there watching for a moment, wondering if it had really moved on its own. The second time was different. I was cleaning the dining room when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the hammock swaying more strongly. It wasn't a natural movement, but something firmer, as if someone was pushing it intentionally. I stopped what I was doing and carefully walked over to the living room. I looked at Estrella. She was still asleep. There was no one else in the house. The third time, I no longer had any doubts. I was in the kitchen washing some dishes when I heard a noise in the living room. I peeked in and saw the hammock swaying on its own with a steady rhythm, as if invisible hands were pushing it. That was too much. I ran to it, grabbed Estrella in my arms and felt my skin crawl. From that moment on, I stopped putting her to sleep there. Instead, I prepared a spot on the sofa filled with blankets and pillows so she would be comfortable and safe. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the yard, a loud, sudden cry froze me completely. It was a scream. A desperate wail, a cry of anguish I had never heard from my daughter. I dropped the broom and ran to the living room with my heart racing in my throat. When I arrived, Estrella was still asleep. Her face was calm, with no trace of tears or any sign of distress. I checked everything, thinking maybe she'd been bitten by an insect. The sound had been clear, as real as if I had heard her crying right next to me. Guillermo was starting to make me uncomfortable. From the beginning, he had been very attentive with my daughter, always telling me how beautiful she was, how lucky I was to be her mother. At first, I took it as part of his education, his kindness, but over time, his gestures began to seem excessive to me. Every time he held her, he showered her with kisses. I couldn't say he had bad intentions, but something in the way he did it made me feel uneasy. He would hold her longer than necessary, gently caressing her head as if he adored her in a way I couldn't understand. Sometimes when she was bathing, Guillermo would step in. He kept staring at us. He said he only wanted to chat, that he enjoyed seeing her laugh with the water. I forced myself to respond naturally, hoping he would leave quickly, but there were times when he stayed longer than I felt comfortable with. He would crouch by the tub and play with Estrella. I started making excuses to avoid being alone with him. When I had the baby in my arms, I would try to act oblivious when he got too close, looking for ways to distance myself without him noticing my discomfort. I couldn't pinpoint anything specific that made me distrust him entirely, but the feeling was there, growing with each passing day. I knew I wouldn't stay for much longer. I didn't have a concrete plan, but deep down, the decision had already been made. I wasn't going to stay in that place for much longer. Maybe I was wrong, maybe it was all just my imagination, but I preferred to be cautious. However, before I could do anything, my baby fell ill. It all happened overnight, without any warning. One early morning she started crying. I knew something was wrong. Immediately, her cry wasn't from hunger or discomfort. It was heartbreaking, deep, as if something inside her was hurting too much. When I touched her, I felt her skin burning. The fever was very high. I tried to calm her. I wiped her forehead with a cold cloth. I rocked her as best as I could, but nothing worked. Her little body trembled and her breathing was labored. I stayed up all night, holding her in my arms, feeling her temperature rise uncontrollably. The next morning, Guillermo insisted on taking us to the doctor. He paid for everything without hesitation, something I appreciated at the time because all that mattered to me was that my daughter was okay. The medications helped bring the fever down a little, but her condition didn't improve completely. She didn't want to eat anything. Every time she turned her head in discomfort, she vomited constantly, but the worst part was the liquid coming from her mouth. It was a grayish, thick substance with a strange smell, like old metal or something that had slowly rotted. I tried everything. I spoke to her gently, tried giving her small sips of water, but she barely reacted. But the worst part happened one day while I was trying to clean her with wet wipes. The fever had gone down a bit, but she was still not eating and barely moving. I tried to keep her cool, wiping off the sticky sweat that covered her skin. As soon as I passed the wipe over her stomach, her body jerked violently, twisting unnaturally, arching her back as if something inside her was pushing her. I thought it was a spasm from the fever, but then she started laughing. The laugh wasn't normal. It wasn't the laugh of a happy baby. It was something stranger, more desperate. It was a sound between happiness and anguish, something that didn't belong to a sick child. She stretched, kicked the air, moved as if she were on something very hot. Fear paralyzed me for a second before I reacted and took her in my arms. I clung to her, feeling my own body tremble. Desperation was choking me. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why my daughter was like this. The priest began visiting the house more often. He said it was necessary to pray for Estrella, to ask for her healing, to ask for God's protection. He prayed over her bed, traced crosses on her forehead, spoke with Guillermo in a low voice, as if they were discussing something I shouldn't hear. I could only stay there, feeling powerless. The priest said that what she had wasn't normal. Her fever wouldn't go away completely, she still didn't want to eat, and her strange episodes became more frequent. I tried to convince myself that the medicine would eventually work. One afternoon, after speaking with Guillermo, the priest approached me more seriously than usual and told me that he could help my daughter, that he knew special cures that could alleviate her. I stayed silent for a moment, trying to understand what he meant. He said that they were baths prepared with blessed water and special leaves, with sacred elements, that would cleanse any evil that might be clinging to her. My first impulse was to refuse. I had no reason to doubt his intentions, but something in his tone made me tense. I told him I preferred to wait, that I trusted the medicine would work over time. Even though it wasn't working as quickly as I hoped, I didn't want to expose my baby, but he insisted. He seemed too worried, more than seemed necessary. He told me that he feared what was affecting her wasn't something natural, maybe something dark was claiming her. The man continued talking and telling me that maybe during the time I spent on the streets, something had attached itself to the girl, a shadow, an evil presence. I held Estrella tighter against my chest and lowered my gaze. There was something in his voice that made me even more nervous, not only because of what he was saying, but because of the way he said it. He sounded too insistent, almost anxious, as if he were desperate to perform those cures on my daughter. I didn't know why, but I held on to my decision. I didn't trust the urgency with which he spoke. Even though I was tired, scared, and my heart was hanging by a thread because of my daughter's health, something told me I shouldn't accept. I stood firm and assured him that I wouldn't go. I'll pray for the little one. His voice was calm, but his gaze wasn't. He reminded me that Guillermo was doing everything possible to help us and that God had put him on our path, that the girl couldn't be in a better place. The exhaustion overcame me that night, but the dream I had was more real than any nightmare I had ever experienced before. A star in my arms, but her skin began to darken as if it were consuming her from the inside. Her little body twisted in an unnatural way while her desperate laughter turned into an inhuman sound, as if she were trapped in unbearable pain. I wanted to hold her, protect her, but something yanked her forcefully from my arms. I looked up and saw a tall figure, broad-shouldered, with an imposing posture. Its body was human, but its head was that of a bull. Its breath was heavy, strong. Behind it, the air distorted as if covered by a scorching heat. I tried to move, but my body was paralyzed. I felt the smell of burning flesh fill my lungs, the temperature in the room rise, and something in the air became oppressive. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I saw that creature take my daughter away, its enormous hands holding her while she faded into her